Joining me now in the studio is Gregg Roman, director of the Middle East Forum, to try to make sense of what's going on in our region and Europe. Gregg, welcome.
Thank you.
We just heard the news of 2 attacks yesterday in Germany by Syrian refugees, asylum seekers. What's motivating these people to commit attacks in the countries where they're seeking asylum?
So when we look at the lack of a examination mechanism that's taking place between the open borders that Turkey once had between itself and Bulgaria, the Aegean Sea, the Adriatic, all depending on where they were going, and the eventual ambition of these refugees to get to an area not where they just felt there was economic opportunity, but also where they had the opportunity to have cultural affinity with other populations that might be part of them, there was the deprivation of a mechanism which led to the ability for these migrants to also have certain radical fringes that were taken through in their ability to infiltrate Western liberal mechanisms for integrating migrants. But in this case, we saw some with extremist sympathies being able to get through that filtration mechanism. And in doing so, we now have the result of those who are feeling disenfranchised by the German state, whether they're lone wolf attackers or they're affiliated with an organization like ISIS or Jabhat al-Nusra or another terrorist organization, and they're either being educated on the internet, they were educated when they were in Syria, they were educated when they were in refugee camps, or they may have been able to pick up their extremist inclinations in Germany or in France itself. So we now see a 1-year period from the open migrant policy which had taken place, and even 1 out of 1 million causing an attack is still at the dead Germans.
It's deeply disturbing. Moving to Turkey, the scale and speed of President Erdogan's purge in the wake of the failed coup has surprised many. How long has he been planning this, and what exactly is he aiming for?
So Fethullah Gulen and Erdogan go back to the early 90s, even to the late 80s when Erdogan was elected mayor of Istanbul. They had planned a 2-step process, one through which Erdogan would work through government and Gulen would work through the Hizmet organization, trying to...
Can you just elaborate briefly? Who is this Fethullah Gulen?
Sure. So
we hear so much about him.
Fethullah Gulen was the son of a Turkish imam that was ejected from the Ottoman structure in 1924. He was born in Izmir and eventually grew up in Istanbul. And he was part of a family of a group of Turks that had the ability to not necessarily take part in Ataturk's secular state. So he saw that it was his ambition to learn what was then a certain Sufi version of Islam within Turkey, but eventually to take the precepts of what he learned and create a structure that would be able to advocate for it, to increase the involvement of his version of Islam within Turkish society. He meets a young aspiring politician,
Recep And he backed Erdogan.
This young politician being Erdogan, and he provided the, let's call it, nonprofit and religious sector support for Erdogan to create what was then another political party, which eventually became the AKP, which is the party that now rules over Turkey. And they worked together on trying to get rid of what they call the deep state, the influence of the military and the police on secular parts of society. They did it so far to put thousands of individuals, former military officials and police officials, in jail in 2007 and 2008 in the sledgehammer scandal. That alliance broke in 2013 when Gulen realized that Erdogan was only in it for political power rather than trying to transform Turkish society into Hizmet.
So was Gulen behind this failed coup?
There's no way of knowing whether he was behind it. But the way in which it was enacted was so amateurish that there seemed as if though there was no actual coordination at the top levels of the military, that there was only a section of it. Maybe it was a last-minute attempt before August meeting that was scheduled to take place before the coup, which was being organized to
So where do you see Erdogan pushing this right now? Where's he heading?
Erdogan probably already had these lists prior to him enacting this counter-coup response. I think he's trying to not just root out any support for the Gulen movement, he's trying to use them as a scapegoat to root out any opposition to AKP support, whether it be secularists, whether it be Republicans, whether it be those who are just against the idea of more Islam within Turkish democracy.
Now, Greg, moving away from Turkey, There was a delegation last week in Israel of prominent Saudi officials led by a former Saudi general. What can we read into this?
I think the first thing we have to do is to applaud Dori Gold's efforts, Director General of the Foreign Ministry, from taking track 2 negotiations from below the radar and making them more public now. We see that the Palestinians are no longer the Arab world's main concern. It's the survival of Arab regimes that have to be able to take the foremost front against the rise of Islamism, whether it be in Turkey or Syria or Iraq. But the willing partner they're finding in the battle against Sunni Islamists, and also the rising specter of the threat of Iran is Israel, a common friend against a common enemy.
Well, this is certainly a big breakthrough to have a former Saudi general coming. Can we expect a further breakthrough in terms of official endorsement from the Saudi regime? I mean, this is obviously being done without
Don't
blessing.
just look at what the Saudis are doing. Also look at the visit of the Egyptian foreign minister, the first visit in a 10-year period by a senior Egyptian official to the country. Look at the breaking of ties right now between Jordan and some of their less responsible allies within the Arab world. And also look at the Arab League conference that's taking place right now, where they're calling for the ability for the Palestinians to be accepting a solution with Israel. It's the first time that the Palestinians and the Israelis are being expected to have mutual pressure.
On the subject of the Arab League, precisely, which opens today in Mauritania, we understand that Egyptian President Sisi is not attending, and apparently Egyptian intelligence forces managed to foil an attempted assassination attempt against him. How stable is Sisi's regime?
I think that Sisi's regime, at least the way in which he's been able to enscone himself with support of the military and also the Interior Ministry, for the time being is stable. However, when we look at the lack of subsidies going from the Suez Canal, the lack of tourism dollars, the lack of revenue coming from the oil and natural gas in the Sinai, and just general unrest, not with Sisi so much, but more the inability to feed the Egyptian populace. Unless Egypt goes through a major economic reform program, they're not going to be able to be the country that they have the promise to be, especially considering what faces them in the future.
And very briefly, do you expect Egypt to rise to that challenge?
I hope so. We don't really have another choice being here in Israel, and having failure be an option.
We all pray for the best. Greg, thank you very much.
Thank you, Eylon.